Welcome to the EchoCast, the podcast about video game news, speculation, reviews, and whatever else I feel like covering. I am your host, Bon, and this week we'll be talking about all of the gaming showcases, the Division 2 Year 5 impressions, BioWare dropping their Star Wars MMO, and much, much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. A special thank you to producer level patrons Hassan and Horseman, supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix, as well as viewer level patron Zinra. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. Okay, so we're going to jump into the gaming news. This week we have 7 topics. This is mostly going to be dominated by the showcases, obviously. So I'm basically going to go through all the games that kind of caught my eye. I'm not going to cover every single game that every single showcase did. It would just be too much. This would take forever if I did that. So, Summer Games Fest 2023, Jeff Keighley's he's trying to make his big show. I will talk more about it, but I still think that the Game Awards is really his premiere show, and that for the foreseeable future, we're still going to have this as being kind of second fiddle, as much as Jeff is trying to get this to kind of replace, E3. But getting into the games, we opened up with Prince of Persia. It's an Ubisoft title. I was surprised to see it here, knowing that we had an Ubisoft show coming a couple days later, which we will talk about after the ad break here. But this looked really, really good. This was really impressive. I'll talk more about it during the Ubisoft part, but as a first impression, this surprised me. I remember when it first popped up, I even said, I was like, is this Prince of Persia? When I was live streaming, and then sure enough it was. And it was really impressive. It looked really, really good. Kind of returning, I believe, to the roots of Prince of Persia, of being like a side scroller, kind of Metroidvania-ish kind of game. The graphics look good. It had these really cool flourishes where, I guess when you pull off like a special move or something, the camera goes from the 2D like side scroller and dives into the action and actually shows it almost like a typical like third person combat sequence, and then it pops back out. It looks really good. It has a cool style. And this little trailer they showed was excellent, in my opinion. And it was perfect for what they were probably going for. And I thought, especially after the negativity of the Prince of Persia remake that's been kind of in limbo, I thought this was a really good thing for Ubisoft and a really good start for the Summer Game Fest. We did get the Spider-Man 2 launch date for PlayStation. It's going to be coming out on October 20th. We will come to find out that the September-October window is going to be pretty busy, it looks like. So if you're a game reviewer or journalist or podcaster like myself, it's going to be a busy year, and that's really exciting. They showed some more footage of the Spider-Man 2. I have some thoughts on that I'm going to talk about after we talk about Starfield, because I think there's a thing to be mentioned about that. Final Fantasy VII closed out the show. Jeff really pushed this as like a big reveal at the end of the show, and then it was just the game that everyone assumed was going to show. I know people obviously love Final Fantasy. I know this. The remake is a big deal to people, and this second part of the remake is another big deal. I still think it's kind of overhyped. I don't. Obviously, the audience is big. It sold a ton of copies. It's very popular. I don't think it's technically a PlayStation exclusive, but it is. As far as we know, it's not coming to Xbox anytime soon. And I think even the PC side of it is in question. They're weird about that stuff. And this was fine. I thought it was, I'll talk about the whole show at the end, but I thought it was kind of a weak ending. Jeff really hyped this up as something huge. I assume from his perspective it was for his show to announce this was probably a really big deal. But I think from an audience perspective, especially someone who's not particularly interested in that title, it was just kind of like an okay thing. There was Mortal Kombat 1 gameplay, so you may know this is kind of a somewhat reboot of the series after the events of 11. The story there, this is kind of a rebirth of the series in a way. The combat and the graphics and everything, the animations, like everything looks amazing. I'm not a fighting game person. I am not really into fighting games and all of that. So, for full clarity, I'm probably not gonna play this. I bought 11 when it came out, and I think I've played it for like 2 hours. It was a huge waste of money for me. I'm just not good at these games, and I'm not into the competitive scene of them, and you can only play the single player so much, and I'm a button masher. And so this thing it's one of those things that I highly respect and just can't really get into, but that's okay. Then another game we had was Alan Wake 2. We had some gameplay from that. This game just looks wildly good, just very impressive. Even just from a pure graphical standpoint, it looks like what you would expect from any of the top of the line first party games from like a PlayStation or something. I think the graphics, the characters, the animations, everything looks incredible. The gameplay looks scary and fun and spooky, and I've only watched a playthrough of the Alan Wake like DLC or like expansion that came out years ago. I've never actually even played or watched the first game, but it seems like it's one of those weird things where it's like a cult classic, but it was like successful. Now what I'm seeing and hearing from people who have played some demos of this that were going on over the weekend is that it doesn't really play like the old Alan Wake games. Those were very focused on using like a flashlight to weaken enemies and then shooting them with a gun or injuring them in some physical way. I kind of understand the story, and there's a bunch of story reasons why you do the things you do in combat. I'm not going to get into it because they basically, the previews and the reviews I've heard of the gameplay that's happening so far is that it is a lot different than the original games. I think it's still reminiscent. It's still, some vaguely similar mechanics and things like that, but it's different. It's a new thing. And that's not bad. I mean, a game like that came out 10, 15 plus years ago, they have to update the mechanics and they have to bring it to a modern audience. So from what I've seen, this looks really, really cool. And this is a game I am 1000% interested in playing. And I feel like it was a pretty good get for Summer Game Fest to be able to show this. A really interesting game that I think we've seen before, but it really caught my eye during this show was Banishers Ghost of New Eden. It's this interesting game where it appears to be, it's an action RPG, and you're playing as a guy who appears to have been like a demon banisher or a monster, hunter, with his partner, his significant other, a woman, and it implies that she's dead, but that her spirit is still going with him, and you're kind of doing like a going back and forth between them to accomplish things thing. And it's implied, I think, during the trailer that you're trying to figure out a way to bring her back. And I don't know, I'm into the love stories and the sentimental things, and this was really great. I think this looks like a really interesting game. And so does the next one, the Lies of P. So we've seen a bit about this. Lies of P is a game vaguely based on the Pinocchio story, which sounds silly, but then you see the gameplay, and it's a Soulsborne type game. It's in that genre for sure, which is a risky thing to get into. That's a genre with its fans like the games to be a certain way, and they expect certain things. The big thing here is they were revealing the launch date, which is September 19th. And I did catch, I believe, a kind of funny Andy Cortez has played the demo of this and was extremely high on praise for it. Basically said that if you're into that genre, this game is doing it really well, and that it controls well. The enemies are fun to fight. It's what you want from that kind of Bloodborne Souls type of game. And so that isn't really my thing. My first venture into that was Jedi Fallen Order, and I didn't really care for it, but then I loved Survivor. And so if some of these newer games learn the lesson of Jedi, Survivor, and Fallen Order, is that it's good to have the ability to challenge the players who like those games. It's also good to basically put in a baby mode for people like me who just want to play the game and enjoy it. So I'm curious to where Lies of P will sit with that, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see. Towards the beginning of the show was a really interesting appearance by Nicolas Cage. He is appearing as one of the survivors in the Dead by Daylight multiplayer game, and you're able to play as him. Now, the big thing with this series has been that it's a type of game where like one player plays as the bad guy against, I think it's 3 or 4 other people who are trying to survive, and they have various tools and mechanics that they can use to fight off the bad guy, but they can't like kill him. It's the whole idea is that they're supposed to survive long enough and use the game's mechanics to make it out of the map in that round. And you would expect that Nicolas Cage would play as one of the villains he's been or something as the bad guy. But in typical Nicolas Cage fashion, he's not doing what's expected, and instead is one of the survivors, which is weird, is not what I expected. I don't think what most people would have. So when you're picking the players who are trying to live to fight off the bad guy, you can actually pick Nicolas Cage as one of these, fully voice acted, and all that. So even if you aren't interested in Dead by Daylight, but you enjoy being entertained by an entertainer, I suggest you check out this clip of Nicolas Cage from the Summer Game Fest. They've had like celebrities and stuff on this before. Even at the Game Awards last year, they had like Al Pacino, who I don't think even knew where he was. But Nicolas Cage really hammed it up. He was really into it. Like I think like last year he had like The Rock and stuff, and mostly it's been like celebrities coming on to this that kind of don't seem like they know what's going on. They just, their agent told them to show up to a thing and they did it. But Nick Cage like seemed into it. I don't think he has any idea what the game is or why he's in it. He said that there's someone close to him is a big fan of the game, so he did it. So whether it's a child or someone in his life that enjoys this game, he said that he's never been invited to be a part of a game before. And I bet that's going to change because if he's willing, and someone will offer him some interesting roles, I bet, and at least as a voice actor, I think would be interesting because it would be hard to deny or hard to ignore that it's him. But he hammed it up. Seemed very cordial. He and Jeff had a hilariously awkward handshake at the end that you could barely see unless you were paying really close attention. And yeah, it was a fun little part of the show. The final thing here I'll talk about with Summer Game Fest was Remnant 2, some gameplay from that. So if you remember the game Remnant from the Ashes, it came out a few years ago. It's a kind of like a shooter Souls game. It's kind of a interesting thing. I really enjoyed it. I found it to be really hard, as you heard me talk about with Lies of P and kind of those Souls type games. I'm just not very good at them. And the first Remnant game was kind of in that same vein where I struggled personally with it, but I really, really, really liked it. I thought it was an extremely good game, and I wish I would have played it more in hindsight. So now the second one's coming out. I'm kind of curious, just like I was before, with are they going to make it a little more approachable for people like me, or are they going to keep it hardcore for people who really get into it? Either one of those things is fine. For me, I really hope they make it more approachable and playable for someone, because I like the idea of, I'm not into a lot of the like Elder Scrolls or Elden Ring and those games, and I just don't care for the medieval like high fantasy aesthetic and stuff. So if they're able to do a game like that uses those mechanics in that genre, but uses guns and cover and stuff like that, I'm all about it. That's my jam. That's what I am absolutely into. So I'm really hoping that that's going to be the case. I'm really hoping that we can see that happen. So so Summer Game Fest was okay. I would say the first third of Summer Game Fest was like a 4 or 5 out of 5, or I'm gonna do the proper 10-point scale. I would say it was a solid 8, 9 out of 10. The first third. came out hot, showed a bunch of really cool stuff, and then it faded real hard, like extremely hard. And as I said before, even the big pop at the end with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, like that just does nothing for me. I don't care. Even if I had a PlayStation, I probably wouldn't be playing that. So it's like, and especially the way he kind of hyped it up, it seemed like it was going to be something that we didn't know about instead of something that we knew was coming. And so overall, I'd give the show probably like a 6, maybe a 6.5 out of 10. It was fine. It was good. But I don't think, I think it was, I said it in my video just about the show. It was the most Jeff Keighley show ever. It had some really cool highs. It had tons of lows, and it was overall, it felt like a bunch of advertisements. And yes, I understand he has to pay for it. But what I'm saying is that a lot of times, it's with Keighley shows especially, you can tell the games that aren't there because of their merit. They're there because they paid him to show them. And it just, I just feel like the majority of his shows typically feel like they're just filler. And like, this didn't need to be 2 hours. This should have been 1 hour. And then the whole thing is like, well, you have to have the money from these advertisements to pay for the show. Well, if the show was 1 hour instead of 2 hours, you wouldn't need as many of those advertisements. Like it's almost like this like beast that keeps like stacking on itself and becoming bigger and longer. And then it has to keep doing stuff to support that, but it ends up bloating more and more. I don't get it. That he needs to like figure out a way to cap at least the Summer Game Fest at an hour. And then maybe for the Game Awards, since it's a big drawn out thing with awards, and maybe that's where he can do all of the advertisements and stuff. But the Summer Game Fest, it just, to me, still just feels like it has no heart and no soul. And it just feels like, it feels even more corporate than E3. And that's insane, because E3 was the definition of corporate. So I don't know, but I mean, I'm not going to complain about seeing a bunch of cool stuff. I would rather the show exist than not. I just, I still don't see it going a direction that seems like really good, or that it's like improving a lot. But I'm sure some people will disagree, and that's fine. Feel free to in the comments of the YouTube video if you want to help with my engagement. So the second story here is the Xbox showcase. My thoughts on that. I will premise this with I am an Xbox fan. I do try to be as unbiased as I can. I am human, so I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not always going to get it right. And so you'll probably see some bias come out in my thoughts on this, and my kind of overall thoughts on all of the shows. But, I guess I'll just throw that out there so you can call me an Xbot and leave if you want. So first game I'll talk about is Fable. So this is by Playground Games. They showed a trailer that I think had some gameplay in it. The fact that you have to say I think is kind of a bummer. This was like captured in engine for sure, but it seemed like it was a lot of cinematic. But there were a few snippets that you could tell were like obviously some type of gameplay, and it looked great. The big thing here is that if you don't know what Fable is, there's Fable 1, 2, and 3. I believe there was also, I think they released the other game that was, oh my goodness, what did it use? The Kinect, I think. I believe that came out. I can't remember if that was just rumors or not. But the big thing about Fable is that it's like it's an RPG. It's set in kind of medieval aesthetic, kind of a high fantasy time. But the big thing was its humor. It was always really big about having some serious themes and story and stuff like that, but never losing completely that it was like a silly story or kind of grotesque or whatever. And this trailer did a great job of portraying that, I think. Kind of being self-aware, kind of making jokes about its own genre and stuff like that, as well as showing some of the use of magic and things like that, which was big. One of the big things in the Fable games that I remember was that you can make good or bad decisions, and if you made bad decisions, your character would literally like show scars and like rot. You would start to like you could tell if someone's character was like a good morale or a good morality or bad morality type person. And I assume they're going to continue with that. This trailer was really cute. I do suggest checking it out because of the way it ends. There's a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of twist to it. That's really cool. And I just think the tone they're setting for Fable is great. and I don't expect this to be out for probably another year or two, but I hope they kind of put to rest some of the concerns people have had of, like, can the Forza people make an RPG? It could be rough. Maybe it'll be rough around the edges when it actually comes out, their first effort in a non-racing game. But what I think they've shown so far is promising. The second game I'll talk about is actually Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. The DLC had a gameplay reveal here that it was doing its best to not reveal too much. It looked good. Their trailers always look really good. You can't fault CDPR for their marketing. They're always pretty good at that. I have seen some conversation by people who have gotten to play some of this DLC and gotten some one-on-ones with devs to learn more about it. And what's interesting about it is that low key, and I really don't think this is being talked about enough, this is the only DLC. So this is the last major content that's going to get released for Cyberpunk. And they're going to move on to the next Witcher and then presumably a Cyberpunk sequel one day. And it sounds like they completely redid all of the RPG skill trees and stuff like that. Apparently the AI has been revamped entirely. Now this was all for the DLC, but it's all going to carry over into the regular game as well. And it sounds like low key they may be taking care of a lot of issues I still have with Cyberpunk. I still think that game feels very shallow and has a lot of mechanics and systems that just don't feel very good to be a part of, as beautiful as the world is and as lovely as some of the characters are to interact with and stuff. I still think that a lot of the game today is pretty mediocre, but a lot of the things that I heard these people talking about that have been revamped for the DLC that are also going to carry over to the main game sounds like a good reason for me to probably play through again. So if that's not a endorsement, I don't know what is. The next game I want to talk about is Avowed. So this is the game that we famously have been living off of a little clip where you see a character like holding against like a staff or a book or a sword or something, and then like making like a some kind of enchantment with their hand and kind of doing the whole the high fantasy magic thing. We've been living on that little clip of a trailer for like 4 years, and this finally showed gameplay. And this game is by Obsidian, and so what it looked to me was kind of like what I expect from a more modern team that made the Outer Worlds. This Avowed doesn't look like the most graphically impressive thing I've ever seen. The animations look a little stiff. A lot of the stuff looks a little out of date, not completely modern. But Obsidian's strength isn't typically their technical ability, but is more typically their storytelling and their characters and things like that. Anyone who played Fallout New Vegas knows this. Anyone who played The Outer Worlds knows this. The Outer Worlds is relatively short. It doesn't look that great. It doesn't even play very well. Like, I don't really love the gameplay, but the characters and the story are really good and really fun and it's interesting to be part of that world. And so Avowed seems like it's going to be kind of down that path. And they've even said Avowed was meant to be their own Skyrim when they started developing it, but then they've kind of decided since then this doesn't need to be the biggest game they've ever made. It can be a smaller scope, where they've said it's going to be more like the Outer Worlds than Skyrim. Now, I assume it's going to be bigger than the Outer Worlds. I don't think that they're making a small game or anything, but I suspect it's going to be more compact. And I'll tell you what, I really think people are starting to appreciate that more and more in recent years, that, not everyone wants to play Assassin's Creed Valhalla. That takes like a legit 80 hours to beat if you mainline the story. You're looking at 60, 70, 80 hours. That's too much for most people. I play a ton of games, and that's too much for me. And then not to mention, if you want to do all of the content in that game, you're looking at hundreds of hours, if not more, right? So Avowed didn't really tickle my fancy too hard. I'm not, super interested in it, but it's going to be on Game Pass, and I'll at least try it because I am interested to see what kind of world Obsidian made around this game. So I thought this was a good showing, even for a game that I wasn't particularly interested in. The next thing I want to talk about was the Series S. So they're releasing new hardware. So it's just going to be a Series S. It's in black now. and it is going to have 1 TB of internal memory. So my guess is they're going to probably stop selling the 512 GB one, replace it almost entirely with this 1 TB one, and that'll just be the Series S moving forward. I am curious if we'll see like a bundled Series X that has like 2 TB in it. I could see that at some point, and then still has the expansion slot if you want it. These games are only getting bigger. We'll talk about Starfield here in a moment, but I just can't even imagine how big of a download Starfield's gonna be. Like, I'm sure maybe they'll use some streaming tech and stuff to try to reduce the size of the downloads. I have no idea, but yeah, I think that the more memory, the better. I have pretty much always had around 12 games on my Series X at any given time, a mix of AAA and indie games. I'm not acting like I have like 12 Call of Duties on my hard drive or anything, but I've never had a big issue with the 1 TB. I have considered getting a little bit more memory, but I just kind of don't feel like I need it. But I know some people like to have a lot more available to them. I don't know why, but to each their own. And I'm really curious to see how that system will kind of sell. There's still grumblings. I just recently saw a BioWare dev talking about, and they were talking about what we're going to talk about soon with Starfield, and how the Series S is, in their opinion, holding back some games and what the games can do if instead games were allowed to just be made for the Series X and PS5. There's been these kind of grumblings, and there's always like kind of this conversation of how true it is or isn't, and whether or not the Series S is holding back games. And I've seen both sides. I've seen some devs say that the Series S is just like how they have to plan for a lower tiered PC platform when they're making these games, so it isn't really that big of a deal. But then I've seen other people say that having to account for that SKU does cause issues. So it seems like it's going to be a debate that's going to go on forever. I'm not really willing to dive into it, but I'm glad this system exists for a cheaper price, and I'm glad that it now has 1 TB of memory. Starfield. Let's talk about Starfield. So they actually did 2 Starfield things. They showed a short trailer during the regular Xbox showcase, which was really good. It's a really good gameplay trailer, and this was before the 40-something minute direct they did that was only Starfield afterwards. So I think I just probably need to do a video, like I might do like a breakdown video or something going into just Starfield, but to talk about it here in some brevity. It just looks so good. It's everything I wanted. I had chills when I was watching the trailer. The music is great. The visuals are better than I expected. The gunplay looks super good in combat. A lot of the movement and stuff looks way more, it looks just a lot tighter than I expected. The worlds, from what we've seen, look varied, and there's just so many things. Like what they did really good was made it very clear that there's going to be a main quest line, which we barely know anything about, which I love, because I bet the story is going to be awesome. And I've seen some people be like, well, they haven't talked about the story, it's probably going to suck. No, I think the story is going to be great, but I think they're doing almost like a Zelda thing, like a Tears of the Kingdom thing, where they're showing off all of the mechanics of the world and the game, because that is speaking for itself. And then the story is going to be the icing on top, which I'm not under the impression that Tears of the Kingdom story is really that great. At least that's the impression I'm under. But just what they showed in this is from things like how you can build your ships in these insane ways. You can recruit your crew, you can romance, you can be a pirate, you can be a good guy, you can make bases on planets, you can do resource collection, you can upgrade things, you can, and that was all stuff that had nothing to do with like the story. And they did such a good job of showing that there's a really good chance you're going to get in there, you're going to do a few of the story beats, and then you're just going to get lost. And you're just going to start getting into side stories, discovering environmental storytelling on whether it's various planets or on planets. The one thing that makes me a little concerned, or not concerned, but I'll be holding my breath for is that they talked a lot about like procedural generation and things like that. And they made it pretty clear that like they even said like you can go to the same place in the same universe as your friend, and the planet that you will land on will be different than them because it's going to be procedurally generated. I'm curious to what the balance is going to be between like handcrafted worlds and cities and stuff like that, and the ones that are going to do procedural generation. My guess is that there's going to be a handful of handcrafted things, which will be really good, probably where all the story beats are and stuff. And then there's going to be a ton of procedurally generated stuff. My guess is that they're going to have a ton of side stories and things like that that will be stuck into the procedural generation, but themselves will be handcrafted. So in order for them to show up on the planet will have to have very specific things procedurally generated, so that side mission or whatever fits into that environment. So I'm excited. I'm really curious to see what that's all about. Obviously the news came after the show, I think during it as well, that the game is going to be capped at 30 FPS on console. That's been the topic of a lot of conversation. And it's going to be 4K 30 on Series X, and I believe it's 1080p and or 1440p on Series S. I can't remember which one, and I don't have it right in front of me. So either way, it doesn't really matter. It's an interesting conversation happening around that, because what's funny to me is that most of the people I see complaining about it are people who I'm almost certain are going to play on PC anyways, so it's like not going to affect them. I don't know why they're so worried about it. But even if they are just trying to stand up for their community or something, the 30 FPS thing, you saw Todd Howard and Phil Spencer on the various interviews since have talked about how it's an artistic decision. And I've seen people call that out as BS, and maybe it is. I don't know. But what I will say is that I saw some commentary from other developers. There was a developer from BioWare talking about it who I interacted with, and I've seen a bunch of others talking about it. And that the idea of it is that some of the commentary has been, well, how can the Series X not run this game at 60? And it's not that it can't run it at 60; it's that they want it to run at 4K. And I don't agree with that decision. I could care less about 4K. I'll play games at 1080p if they're running at 60 FPS at least, but I'm not the one making the game. The only thing I'm actually concerned about with the 30 FPS thing is like the gunplay. This game looks like it has a good shooting mechanics, and so I'm a little concerned that on console it's going to make the shooting feel a little choppy. That said, my game of the year last year was A Plague Tale Requiem, and at the time the game only played it was 4K 30 FPS on Series X, and I guess I noticed, but not really. And the funny thing is, since then they've done a 60 FPS patch, and I think it feels worse because it looks a lot worse. So it's one of those things where I would say A Plague Tale Requiem is a pretty good example where they initially released the game running at close to 4K at 30 FPS. And yeah, it felt a little okay. It didn't feel great at first, but I got over it because it still felt really good. And the game was super good, and the story was good. The environments were good. The combat was fun. Like, all of those things were so good, I didn't care about the 30 FPS. I would have preferred 60. But now that they have 60 in Requiem, I actually don't like it. I went back to play it again, played through the 60 a little bit, and I was like, this actually doesn't feel amazing, and it doesn't even look and it looks a lot worse. So, without being too much of a bootlicker here, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And there's also two other factors. One, if they allow mods on the console version of this game the way they did with Fallout 4, someone's going to mod in 60 FPS like that. And the other part is that I'd say there's a really good chance that in December or even like next summer, that they're going to come out and say, hey, we figured it out. We have a 60 FPS patch coming for Series X. And there you go. We did it. Because you have to look at Skyrim and even Fallout 4 and even New Vegas, even though that wasn't made by Bethesda, and even Fallout 3. Bethesda games have legs, and people are going to be playing, and especially with the way it's shown, Starfield is going to have a lot of people playing it for 5 years, maybe for 10 years. And so you can't be super short-sighted when you think about these games. looking at the trailer as on the video version of this, I have the trailer playing. Like you can like hijack other ships and go on the ship and kill the crew and steal their ship. Oh, it's so cool. Anyways, 30 FPS thing, I understand where the conversation's coming from. I just think it's funny that like someone who commented on it was like, oh, this 30 FPS thing I think is bad. And I was like, well, honestly, the bigger hindrance for that is that, you know, people using a controller for a Bethesda shooter game. There, at least Fallout 4 doesn't feel very good on controller, in my opinion, the combat. And so I think that more than likely controller shooting is going to feel way worse than the 30 FPS. Now, maybe they're kind of connected and maybe one will not feel great because of the other. I don't know. But yeah, I think this was a really, really good showing for Starfield. I think it's the showing that they needed, and it has most, I think, reasonable people like insanely excited. I think this 30 FPS talk has some genuineness to it. I also think it's kind of a nitpicky thing where this was so good, people had to find a reason to be unhappy, and that's just the way it goes. So we'll see. The next game I want to talk about was Star Wars Outlaws, and so this was an interesting thing to be shown here because there was an Ubisoft forward the next day, which we'll talk about here in a moment after the ad break. But this was just a trailer, and it looked super, super good. I was really impressed by it, even just as a trailer. Obviously, there was no gameplay yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I thought this is from the team that made The Division. So if you know me, if you know my content, you know that I'm pretty close with at least a few people who are involved with Ubisoft Massive, who is making this and the Avatar game. It looks cool, and the main character, she looks really fun and interesting and kind of witty, and she has kind of like a young Han Solo vibe to her. And this game, I'm really, really interested to see what Ubisoft Massive, who did The Division 1 and 2, can do when they aren't beholden to a loot system, to multiplayer, to PvP, when they're allowed to just make a cool single player game with a bunch of cool story beats and a beautiful open world and multiple planets. I'm really excited to see what they can do with that, because I have sang the praises of Ubisoft Massive for many years. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased because of the games I prefer and the people I know, but I think they're the best studio at Ubisoft. I think studios like Red Storm are right there as well, but Ubisoft Massive does some really good stuff, and I still think, as heralded as The Division 2 is, I still think it's underrated, even by the people who play it, it seems like sometimes. And yeah, this trailer looked great, and I'll talk about the gameplay during the Ubisoft Forward chat. We saw a game called South of Midnight. It was only a cinematic. This is by Compulsion. I believe they made like We Happy Few and some other games that haven't been super well received. But just the simple, this trailer had kind of a Miles Morales, the Spider-Verse kind of feel to it. It was animated, and they had kind of that low frame animation going on, and so it was like kind of hitchy, and it just looked really, really cool. The visuals in this were great. The mood that this trailer set was really cool, but because of their issues with the games that they've had before, I won't get overly excited quite yet, because they kind of need to actually knock a game out of the park before I think we get too excited. We had Forza Motorsport show up with its launch date. This is being made by Playground, and it comes out on October 10th. This is where I was saying before, with Spider-Man 2 coming out 10 days later. It's going to be a busy October for game reviewers, I think, and myself on this podcast. Forza Motorsport is interesting. You see a lot of people talk about like, oh, they prefer Horizon because it's more arcadey. They can just drive through everything, and it's more fun for them. You can't ignore Motorsport, though. It's taken, in my opinion, the Gran Turismo spot of like the casual sim, and just with its depth and its graphics and its physics and all of the systems it has that work together to make a really fun game. I always get really into these games for like a couple weeks, and then I tend to drop off, but it's always a really fun few weeks. And again, going back to the whole Game Pass thing, it makes that fine. And then if they release a DLC, or if I just get a hankering to go back and play, I can just do it. I don't have to worry about what system I bought it on, or if I transferred it correctly or something. It's just there. I'll play it for a few weeks when it comes out. I'm probably gonna love it. It's probably gonna be a 8, 9, maybe, probably. I'm guessing it's gonna get like an 8.5 out of 10, like an 85 Metacritic score. Because they make really good games. The motorsport games are always really good, even if they aren't for everyone. So to get a date on that is really exciting, and I think that sets up what will be a pretty good year for Xbox. Redfall was obviously a down point, but if Hi-Fi Rush, Forza Motorsport, and Starfield all hit pretty well, it's a decent first party lineup. And then they have obviously all of the day one and even the not day one Game Pass games that really do make being an Xbox gamer fine, actually pretty awesome. I often on podcasts and stuff see oh yeah, Xbox gamers could really use a win. Xbox gamers are mad about this or that. Xbox gamers, well, I'm sitting here with a backlog I'm never going to catch up on, mostly off of first party and or Game Pass games. And so I'm sure there are Xbox gamers who are all of those things out there. I bet the majority of them, the ones who aren't super loud on Twitter and social media and who don't have entire personas built around being toxic jerks on the internet, I bet most people are fine. Obviously we want more cool stuff and it looks like we're going to get it. But I think maybe some of the woe is Xbox fan attitude you see is toxic concern almost, in my opinion. But we'll see. A game called Clockwork Revolution by inXile was shown. This was like a first-person shooter kind of thing. Just inXile. This was we didn't know what they were working on for many years now, and so to kind of see what they're up to was really cool. There's a game called 33 Immortals by Thunder Lotus. This is the studio who did Spiritfarer, which is a game that I think everyone who played it loved it. I really, really like Spiritfarer. I just couldn't stick with it. That I hit. There was a part of the game I hit that I found was just not very fun for me, and so I kind of dropped off. But I still really, really like that game. And this 33 Immortals is a 33-person co-op, isometric rating melee combat game. I'm really curious to how they're going to balance that, how they're going to make it work, but it looked really, really cool, and at the very least, I'm intrigued. They showed Senua's Saga, the Hellblade sequel. I saw some people upset about this because it didn't show full-on gameplay. I mean, Senua's Saga is probably not going to be a game that you say, wow, that's the best gameplay I've ever played in my entire life. It could be, for all we know, but I don't think that's the goal. Senua's story is a lot about talking about, Senua and the struggles that she has and the way they're presenting the story and the characters and her character and, the sound design and the graphics and stuff. And if you think of it like that, which I do, this trailer's great, and it looks like this next game is going to be a visual masterpiece. I really, really hope the combat and other things about the game are really good and improved from the first game. And people say oh wow, I do love the combat of Senua's Saga, and all of these other things is insanely good. I hope for that, but that's not really what I'm going for with this game, at least. And so what they showed, I thought was amazing. I don't know what's happening in the story. I don't feel like anything was spoiled, but I'm intrigued. And I think that's what they were going for. The last one is a game I could care less about, but I know that some people in the community who listen to the podcast and stuff loved it, was Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. This seems like it's kind of a sequel to Like a Dragon. Of course I'm gonna forget what it's called. The silly turn-based Yakuza game. This one looks like it's going to continue the antics, and even though I'm not super interested in it, seeing people pop for this was really exciting. It seems like the people who are into this series and into these games, this was exactly what it seems like a lot of people wanted, and that makes me super happy for them. So talking about the Xbox Showcase, kind of wrapping it up, is I thought this was really good. If I had to give it a scale, I'd probably give it a 9.5 out of 10. I think to get the perfect score, I would have wanted to see State of Decay 3. I would have wanted to hear anything from Halo or Gears, anything from the team who's making of course I'm gonna forget it in the moment. But some of the other games that we didn't hear from, the really high, the kind of high profile ones that we didn't hear from. But I did see a good point. I think it was Paris Lily mentioned that the fact that, you know, say like a Halo and Gears didn't show up was a really good sign, because it was still a really good show, and it showed people that Xbox can exist without those IPs being the top tippy top IPs on Xbox and kind of in gaming in general, like they were at one point. And so I agree with that take. I thought this was really good. I think the Starfield showcase, the direct, was just maybe one of the best presentations of a game I've ever seen. You know, whether it comes to fruition or not, we'll have to wait and see. But and then I think the actual show itself, it's so funny, you saw so many people being like, wait, what was in the actual show? And that's not an insult to the show, because the show was really good. It's just the Starfield direct was so good, it was easy to kind of forget what happened before. Okay, let's get into the Ubisoft Forward. This was, you know, it was really good. It was better than I expected, at least. So they showed Star Wars Outlaws, some gameplay, and it looks awesome. I expected it to look at least like the movement and combat. I was expecting to look a little bit more like the Division, and it didn't, not really at all. If she was taking cover, I don't remember seeing it, or it wasn't like a prominent feature, where like she, you know, it didn't have like a prompt to take cover. It seems like it was more contextual, which, you know, we may be seeing in some of the games coming out in the near future. And they just did a really good job of giving us a little bit of the main character's personality. There were a few, like, I don't know if they were, I think that they were in-game, you know, the in-game animations, but they were obviously up-res because they were kind of set in stone. But then, you know, they showed that we're going to be able to make choices, and that we're going to have some freedom with like flying our spaceship and where we go and what we do. And so, you know, probably in somewhat typical Ubisoft fashion, there's probably going to be like a main line of things that you can keep on, and you'll be able to kind of spread out and do side missions and do other stuff as well. So they pretty heavily hinted that there's going to be multiple planets that you can explore, that it is an open world game. We'll have to see how big each open world is. I imagine that they'll be somewhat limited, maybe not quite as, you know, not like a Division 2 map for every single planet, but, you know, even then, you know, that's still going to be pretty impressive. And I really think this looked really good. I felt like the vibe they were showing was awesome. I think it looks like they have kind of like a Red Dead Redemption system of the Deadeye system, which for the type of character that you're going to be playing as, I think works really well. And yeah, I think that this showed extremely well, and I think that it, along with the next thing we're going to talk about, like I said before, really, I hope is showing people that Ubisoft Massive is a force to be reckoned with, and in my opinion, kind of a unique force amongst within Ubisoft. The other game they showed from Ubisoft Massive was Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, and they had gameplay and a trailer. And so they kind of talked about who you're going to be playing as, you know, what the story is, or what the origins of the story is. And they got into, you know, the main idea of what you're going to be doing is bringing together all these clans, proving that you're a real Na'vi because of the story. I won't go more into it yet. But then it showed the gameplay. And what's interesting to me is it looks like it's going to be a big mix of like traversal gameplay, which reminded me a lot of Mirror's Edge. It should be known that the developer who's in charge of movement in the gameplay worked on Mirror's Edge, so don't be surprised if you see some similarities there. And then the combat is very Far Cry from what we've seen so far, and I've seen some people try to portray that as a negative thing. You know, the best part about Far Cry is its combat. Like, I would say that there's lots of other things that get monotonous or repetitive about that series, but the gameplay is always great. Like the gunplay and, you know, shooting and taking down, you know, outposts and stuff like that is always a lot of fun. So Ubisoft Massive, I don't think that they'd be the studio to just straight up copy anything. And like, I'm not expecting, even though it may kind of look like it, the combat to be like exactly like Far Cry. But instead, I think that, there's probably some inspiration there, and it's going to have a massive twist. They talked about in some of the interviews I saw was that like you have to remember that when you're playing Avatar and you're playing as a Na'vi, you're playing as like a 10-11 foot tall, super strong, like super agile, like elite warrior. And so you're gonna be able to do a bunch of really cool stuff. There's gonna be combat from, and there's gonna be these various regions that you go to recruit clans to your cause, and they're all gonna have like their own unique creature that you can tame and ride to get around areas faster and things like that. You can customize your character, you can customize your weapon loadout, you can customize everything about your experience, because again, this is another single player focused open world game in this really cool licensed world. And they did mention too that this will have a 2-player co-op, which I think is really interesting, and is only going to reinforce that you're going to be able to kind of customize your own Na'vi who you play as. And so I think the Avatar game showed extremely well. It comes out in December. I believe it was December 7th, which is really exciting. I suspect that's when they wanted it to come out last year, and they didn't make it happen, and there was probably good reason for that. But I'm sure they wanted to release it at the same time as the last movie. But instead it's going to turn into a nice in the middle thing. I also did see an interview with Drew Reckner, who's actually a Division 2 dev, about this, and they asked if there's plans for it to be a live service. It is not. The Avatar game will not be a live service game, but they are playing 2 DLCs. And so, and I believe the Star Wars Outlaws is in a similar boat. And so for any Division fans who are hoping for a Division 3 one day, I would say the fact that both Star Wars and Avatar are going to come out, and they will end development at some point after they come out, I would be on the lookout for us to maybe start hearing some news about at least a Division 3 development beginning confirmation. I would say maybe the end of next year, but that's a side tangent. They showed off some of the Prince of Persia gameplay. I don't have a lot to say about it, but I will say that a bunch of the pundits and stuff that I watch on podcasts and things like that who got to put their hands on this, I saw multiple people saying this was the game of the show, that it was their favorite game to play, that they played while they were there, that it was just, it's very, very tight. It feels really good, that it is that kind of Metroidvania game that maybe people didn't realize they wanted from Prince of Persia again, but that it's probably gonna be pretty successful, and that it even like runs extremely well. I know one was saying that it runs at 60 FPS on the Switch, and it looks incredible. So that Prince of Persia game may be like a low-key huge success for Ubisoft that maybe people weren't looking for. They also showed some Assassin's Creed Mirage gameplay and trailer. This is the game that's supposed to kind of harken back to the kind of the OG Assassin's Creed games. If you're watching the video version, the trailer is playing right now of that, and it does look like it's returning to kind of that Assassin's Creed 2, 3 movement. A lot of the way that things play out reminds you of those old games, the traversal and the parkour and things like that, and the assassinations. My goodness, you're playing as an assassin. Isn't that wild? In a Assassin's Creed game, after Valhalla and Odyssey had you not really doing that exactly. It looks really good. I'm really excited for it. This is the Mirage is a game I'm really excited for, and I hope it does well, because we know that Ubisoft is going to continue doing the Valhalla Odyssey style Assassin's Creed games. But if Mirage does well, keep in mind Mirage was meant to be a Valhalla DLC. They decided to turn it into its own game, doing this return to the old school way of playing the game. If Mirage does well, they'll keep doing this. So you'll have your 2 lines of Assassin's Creed, the old school Assassin's Creed that people say they want, and the newer school type that for people who want more of a casual looter shooter experience almost. I hope it's successful, because I want more of that, and it looks really, really good. The Crew Motorfest showed. To me, it's just Horizon 5, Forza Horizon 5 at home. I thought that The Crew 2 was one of the worst feeling games I've ever played in my life. And it's a racing game with bad controls that like feel disconnected and don't feel good to play. And to me, that's just like such a sin of gaming. Like, And it's not even like, it didn't even have like a fun arcadey feel to it. It just didn't feel good to play. Where you play a game like Horizon 5 and it does feel good to play. You feel connected, and even though it is arcadey, it's not a sim, you still feel like, you know, you're in control, and it felt good, at least in my opinion. I found out on Reddit some people disagree. They showed XDefiant, like the way they show that game is like, I think it's gonna be probably pretty successful. I think it's gonna have a lot of players. I still to this day think that the player base of XDefiant, or at least the vocal part of it, are people who really hate Call of Duty and more than they actually like XDefiant. But who cares if they're playing it, I guess. It just still just looks not good. Like, I think it, and I've played it for a long time. And so I won't discuss a lot of those specifics, but like, it just, I think the gunplay, like, it just doesn't feel good to play. It's not nice to look at, in my opinion, but people are getting into it. A lot of people played the beta and stuff like that. So it's probably just going to be one of those games that I have to give props to for being successful in some capacity. That just isn't my thing, I guess. A part of it is knowing, or at least being somewhat aware of the original vision for it, and it was supposed to be something much different than what it has become. And so maybe I'm just sad that we missed out on that OG vision, but there we are. And then they had a couple mobile games, the Division and the Assassin's Creed mobile games. If you're into that stuff, go check it out. I don't care. In fact, I'm kind of frustrated by the Division Resurgence, which is their mobile game, because they're trying to like portray it as being this like narrative experience and stuff like that, and it probably will be. It's also going to be rife with like the mobile crap. But I just like, you know, if you have this cool idea for a story, let's play it in the real game. Don't put it into this mobile game. So maybe that's just me being bitter. I don't know. But Ubisoft Forward Show was great. You know, some really, really high highs, some, you know, like medium lows, I guess. I would give it like a solid, like, I don't know, like 7.5 out of 10. I think it was a really good show overall. If it was just Avatar and Star Wars and maybe Prince of Persia, maybe Assassin's Creed Mirage, I would give it like a 9 out of 10. I think some of the other stuff is just not for me. So I don't necessarily want to down it a lot because it didn't cater to me specifically. But I thought it was overall a really good show for Ubisoft. And what's funny is looking at all of these shows, if you would have told me 6 months ago that I would wonder who had the worst show, if it was Summer Game Fest or PlayStation, I wouldn't believe you, even as someone who is like an Xbox fan. I think Xbox pretty clearly, at least for me, had the best show, and that was by quite a bit. I don't think Ubisoft's show was that much worse than Summer Game Fest or PlayStation, and I think depending on your personal preferences, you could say it was better. And so I really feel like those three showcases are like really close together, with Xbox being kind of set apart, and that's surprising. I think that's interesting. That's just my take, of course. Feel free to disagree with me in the YouTube comments, or if you want to track me down on Twitter or go to my Discord or something and tell me I'm dumb. But overall, though, I think they were all good showcases. I don't think any of them were bad. And I think that means that we've had a pretty cool June for video games, a E3 season with no E3. I do have a few more stories I want to kind of hit real quickly before I wrap up the show. The Division 2 Year 5 has released after they had to do like 24 hours of maintenance. That was unexpected to get it to work, but it is up and going now. I haven't played through it yet. So far, I've seen people be pretty happy with so they've always done these manhunts where there's like 4 targets, you take them out, and then eventually you get to fight the main target of that season. The way they're doing it now is that there's actually 4 people you need to rescue, and then there's a big person you need to rescue, and that's going to be like the final part of the season. I've seen some people complain about it. I think it's really cool. It's a good change up of how the season will play out, where you aren't hunting but you're saving, and it's all to try to build back up this new settlement in the game called the Castle, or this reborn settlement, I guess is the better way to say it. So far it looks really good. The cinematics, there's an opening cinematic that doesn't look great, but I think with what they're working with, that team, it's fine. It's okay. They introduced this new dog to the there's a petable dog in the Warlords of New York. And it's a puppy that is bigger. It's like a Saint Bernard. It's huge. The proportions are way off. And then this new dog they have, it's in DC, you can pet it, and it is the ugliest model of a dog I've ever seen in my life. Like, maybe it's just an ugly species, like it's the type of dog it is. Maybe it's just, maybe that's what they look like. I don't know. But anyways, it looks really cool. They did confirm as well. They did a big live stream last week for year 5 before it released. They confirmed that season 4 of year 5 will be in Brooklyn. That's where the story DLC is going to be. I had predicted that a while ago, as well as other people, I'm sure. But I'm really excited for us to go back to where the beginning of the Division 1 was. That was kind of the training area, was Brooklyn. And I think we're returning there, which is super exciting. They also confirmed that 20 million people have played the Division 2 since it released. Obviously, that's not concurrent. Obviously, that includes, like free week. Actually, I wonder if it includes free weekends or not, or if it would include when people bought it for like $5 and things like that. But hey, 20 million people is a lot of people. It's hard to reach that many players, and so no matter how they got that number, it's impressive. I did comment that live show. The Division community was really, really lucky back in the Division 1 days, especially in early Division 2, to have like Petter, Yannick, before he was the head before he was the lead on the game, and like Hamish. And it's interesting because they've tried to do some of these live streams with their new team, and their new team I think is working really hard, is doing a good job. They're doing their best, but we maybe didn't realize what we had back then, and I think that you kind of have to realize what you're working with now. And I would say that instead of doing like an hour and 20-minute live stream that mostly felt like people awkwardly reading off of a prompter, I really think they should probably just cut a nice 5 to 10 minute video for these content announcements and stuff like that. It's, I don't blame the people involved at all. I think they're doing the best they can do, and I think they're trying really hard. I just think it's like kind of a weird look, and it's like awkward to watch, in my opinion. And I couldn't do any better, but I also wouldn't do it. If I kind of realized that situation I was in, I would probably realize like, hey, we should cut a nice tight 5-minute video with some proper, like, someone voice acting. Like, if we're gonna read off a script, not do it live on the camera, but do it in a place where we can re-record and kind of work on it and things like that. But that's just my opinion. You can disagree with me. Diablo 4, I have reached Act 4. I'm not done with it yet, so I don't really want to do a proper review of it yet. Still really enjoying it. Obviously, I was on vacation for the weekend, so I'm a little behind now. I need to jump back into it soon, which I will do soon, probably tonight. I will try to jump back in. So I will update that as it goes. We did find out last week that BioWare is dropping their Star Wars MMO. They're going to be giving it to a different team. Some of the BioWare devs who are working on that game are going to go to that new team. I think the studio is called Broadsword. And then the rest of the devs are going to be offered positions at BioWare or within EA, and ones that don't want to take that will it said laid off. That if you're offered a different position and you don't take it, I feel like that's quitting, but that's just my opinion. And the whole purpose of this is supposedly so BioWare can focus on the games that they have coming out with, which is currently Dragon Age Dreadwolf and the next Mass Effect game. So hopefully for all of us who are waiting with bated breath for those games, myself especially, Mass Effect, that's a good thing. You get in some weird conversations, when it's like people could lose their jobs and stuff like that. There's been some kind of interesting reporting ever since of some people saying that there really won't be layoffs, and that these people, spots will be found for them, or kind of like what I said, like if they choose to not stay, that isn't necessarily a layoff. It just means that the project you were working on is gone and you don't want to work there anymore. And to me, again, that's kind of quitting, but we'll have to see how that plays out. And then the last thing was just quickly mentioning it. There was a bunch of drama on Twitch last week. They made some changes to like advertising and things like that upset a lot of people. They've basically reversed it all. But in hindsight, what was so funny about it to me is that And I don't want to take the stance of like, well, it didn't affect me, so I don't care. But the thing was that all of the outrage and stuff, even like the big creators who were upset, like the changes that happened were because of some changes in government, and the FTC in the United States has implemented some restrictions and some guidelines with how things can be advertised to keep things from being predatory. And so the changes they were trying to make were to comply with that. And the whole point is basically so that you would rather have Twitch telling you that you can't do something than the federal government. So Twitch tries to play as the middleman and tries to keep you from doing stuff that's going to get you in trouble with the feds and get them in trouble with the feds. And so, I don't know, it was a weird take. It turned into this big thing where a bunch of creators saw it as an opportunity to basically like just get a bunch of clicks from hating on Twitch because that's really popular, despite the fact that, in my opinion, it's still the best streaming platform by like a long ways. It's not even close. YouTube is still obviously is okay with just being a VOD service. There's some other streaming service that's trying to like dunk on this situation. And I watched it for a minute, and there's a dude named Aiden Tate or something that's their main, like their big guy, and he's like this like super controversial piece of shit. So like, you know, maybe I think it's Kick. I think that's what it's called. And yeah, it was an interesting situation. To me, it was a lot of sensationalizing, in my opinion, and people misconstruing situations because they saw other people, you know, who they just believe everything they say, saying things, so they jumped on the bandwagon, or people misinterpreting things or not understanding why decisions were being made the way that they were made. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna like defend Twitch. They're owned by Amazon. They're owned by a company that has more money than God, right? But there's also like a weird obsession with like, you know, going after Twitch when they're like YouTube is going to make these same restrictions if they haven't already. This Kick live streaming is going to have to do it too. Like they're all going to have to do these changes. It's just Twitch has a way of one, being the ones that typically do it first, and then also kind of stepping on the rake when they do it, and maybe not always communicating very well. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I did have a couple questions lined up for this week, listener questions, which you can put into a Google form I have linked on my Twitter and in the Discord. You can ask in Discord, you can ask on Twitter and the YouTube comments. I will take questions or topics or feedback in any of those places. This show's run long and I need to get off because I'm recording this on a Tuesday and I have another episode to record this week. So I'm going to skip the questions this week. We will maybe do a bunch of questions on Friday because I think topics will be fairly sparse. So hang tight. And we'll do a bunch of that. And please send new ones in all of the ways I just said. And that's where I'm going to start to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm sorry it's late. I had this vacation. Things didn't work out timing wise. I'm kind of glad I got to summarize all of the shows that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And it was nice. You know, it was a good weekend for gaming, even though I wasn't here. And I'm still glad I was able to kind of get on and talk about all of this. And I'm excited to see what comes. We have a bunch of good games coming. I suspect more announcements. I know that the one of the Xbox execs said that they expect to have another showcase probably early in 2024. So for them, this is going to be like kind of like a, you know, like a beginning of the year and a middle of the year thing that they'll do every year. So, you know, but we'll be playing Starfield here in a few months. We'll be playing Forza Motorsport. We'll be playing a bunch of, we'll be playing an Avatar. We'll be a Navi here in a few months, as well as a ton of other games. So, yeah. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Send your questions and your feedback into the Discord or the Google form and all of that, that you can find either in the Discord or on my Twitter. I am all over the internet as Von Diesel on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and on Twitch. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.